Hey everyone, we're just going to give folks one more minute here to jump on and we will get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. Looks like we've got folks jumping on right now. All right, I think we're 2 minutes after. We'll go ahead and let people still roll in. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Margaret Dawson, and we're here to talk about two of my favorite open source projects, Fluent Bit and OTel. Just as a quick background, I've been involved with open source software and communities for 15 years or so. And about 18 months ago, I entered the observability space, which brought in a whole new group of software and projects around that market, including the M3 time series database, Prometheus, OpenSearch, Jaeger, OTel, and FluentBit, to name just a few. And I'm sure those are all near and dear to your heart. And of course, how could I forget Kubernetes, my personal favorite. And in looking at these projects and technologies, I found myself really looking at all of the noise in the market, really, I would say, and confusion around different collectors and agents and plugins, which really took me to the OTel collector and Fluent Bit specifically. And I was trying to really figure out in working with organizations when I should recommend one versus the other. And so today we're going to walk through a little bit of my learnings. And joining me, who will be very helpful and much more knowledgeable, he's a Fluent Bit expert and maintainer, Anurag Gupta, and he's going to do a demo. Anurag, anything you would like to add before we kick off?
Oh, just saying hello, everyone, and super excited. I know this is a very talked about topic, so this will be great. This is I'm very excited for today.
Awesome. And there is a Q&A section in the Zoom webinar as well as chat. So if you have questions as we're going through this, put them in either place. We have plenty of time for Q&A towards the end. If we are able to look at that while we're presenting and there's something relevant in that moment, we'll try to address it too. But at the very least, we'll get to it at the end. So please put your comments, chats, questions, whatnot. Hope to make this engaging. So let's kick in. The first thing I realized is we love to make this a competitive framing or, OTel collector versus Fluent Bit. And the first thing I realized as I started working with these projects is that framing is really wrong. They complement each other very well, and we're going to talk about that more and more. So, what I really want to do is look at what these two have in common, which they do. There are specific ways they are unique or different or beneficial for a specific use case, and they play nice with each other in some specific ways. So, let's kind of walk through those pieces. So, from a common perspective, another one of my ahas is we're really quick to put these projects in a box. We tend to use the word collector, protocol, agent, which is correct. But, as you start to dig into this code, these projects, this software, they're more frameworks or portfolios, or at least they do much more than just collect or ingest data. So that's the first thing we need to understand about both of these. The other thing is we tend to believe that they are a single telemetry type based on the heritage of where these both came from. But the reality is both now support all three main core telemetry types, logs, traces, and metrics. And both are great for collecting and transmitting that data as part of an observability architecture. Sometimes there are other use cases, which I'm sure Anurag can talk to as well. Um, Other commonalities, both are, of course, open source and vendor agnostic, and both have vibrant communities around them. I recently looked at the Fluent Bit project and it hit 15 billion downloads and I think has somewhere around 425, 430 contributors. OTel Collector is equally as vibrant. So, what have I missed about how these projects are either misinterpreted or just left out of conversations, Anurag?
Yeah, I mean, I re fully would reinforce what you said is like this is really an and. Where we're many of us are engineers trying to solve problems, trying to get things done, and there's a great combination of these projects, which we'll show later. And I think also to the point about you made about the collector side,
Mhm.
These things are also doing processing. They are helping the business achieve specific goals, like making sure that they're not leaking sensitive data by processing that data out, whether it's in logs, whether it's in traces. They're helping folks do things like reduce or remove redundant data. So helping things alongside cost or redundancy. So that processing thing is certainly growing within these projects as well. But yeah, another great way that they can kind of work together to help achieve some of those things.
That's a great point. And I should add that both are innovating, I think, at a very fast pace. We're seeing a lot of continuous improvements and updates and things moving forward. And I'm sure that's part of that, healthy community. So things are changing very quickly in this space. So let's back up a little bit and we'll look at each of these and what they do well, and a bit of where they came from. So as you might know, Fluent Bit was initially purpose-built for logs, but as I said, supports all telemetry types. You may be familiar with its early brother, Fluent D. Um, Fluent Bit's greatest competitive edge is that it is incredibly lightweight, fast, and resource efficient. And obviously, that makes it ideal for containerized environments at scale. Edge use cases are becoming increasingly popular. We're seeing a lot of organizations use it at the edge. Basically, any environment that requires just super high throughput and low latency. Whoops, sorry. FluentBit does have a huge plugin ecosystem, although we are going to talk a minute about the challenges of that ecosystem. And in addition to the provided plugins, you can extend FluentBit with Lua, Wasm, Go, and now Zigbee 4, which just came out in the latest version of FluentBit. So, what are some of the challenges that we face? I mentioned how it is wonderful in resource-constrained environments. FluentBit is written in C, and we can't raise hands, so I can't see how many of you write in C or love C language. I don't hear that a lot, but there are still those of us hardcore C coders. But what that means is it does make it hard for some to contribute without that knowledge. It does enable, great compatibility and performance, but the plugins are limited and very hard to create. There's also an issue of being very centralized versus decentralized, which when we talk about OTel, you'll see that. So everything has to kind of be in the main source repository. So extensibility can be a challenge. And finally, we do see challenges with troubleshooting and debugging. So that's kind of the big stuff I see. Anurag, are there other challenges or even benefits that I haven't touched on?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's also important to realize like FluentBit is the second project in that larger Fluent ecosystem. And many of the times the decisions we made with FluentBit to take everyone back are essentially lessons learned from FluentD.
Hmm.
So FluentD 2010 coded on a train ride to help solve Hadoop big data problems back in the day.
Oh, Hadoop.
Yeah, I know. And similar similar style of, hey, we want to be able to make it easy to get data into these big data systems. That FluentD was meant to solve that with a distributed
Hmm.
architecture. So plug anything you want, was written in Ruby, so more easy, scriptable, accessible language. And have a bit of resiliency baked in. So buffering, how to send data. Now, the challenges we would find with Fluentd is when we would get to more advanced scenarios. How do I do multi-routing? I want to take my one piece of data, send it to my Hadoop system, and I want to send it to a file system or send it to a observability system. And that routing was really challenging within Fluentd. We would have this kind of loop of, hey, once the data enters, it must exit, and you'd have to kind of duplicate data. So you'd actually have to double the resources to send data into multiple places. Now, unfortunately, that was very hard to configure, and so many folks just never ended up using some of those capabilities.
Hmm.
And the second part of FluentD that was hard is we had this very distributed architecture. So we would say, you can write a FluentD plugin, you can write a FluentD plugin. And we got thousands of them, but man, the quality was just not up to par. And we would
Hmm.
frequently run into folks who would say, oh, I tried this out and it just completely, blew up when I upgraded
Almost
my.
sounds like OTel a little bit, so we'll come back to that point.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where like Fluent Bit we made some of these design decisions. So we have almost like a pub sub, almost like a mini Kafka style model for folks who are familiar with that, where once the data enters, any number of plugins can read from that same queue or can subscribe to that plugin with the match system. It's way more efficient. And then all the plugins are there by default. And that makes it really useful where if you take this thing and you deploy it in one cloud provider versus the other, it contains all of those plugins. So makes it harder on us for making sure tests pass and everything like that. But I think for the users, it gives a nicer experience.
But if that plugin isn't in that central repository, that's where some of those challenges that I spoke to comes in, right?
100%. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So
Okay.
if you don't have it, well, you got to add it to the source code, add it, do all the
Right.
tests, and it can be much harder to get it approved because the quality bar is just higher there.
That's a great way to describe that. All right, let's jump into the OTel collector. So just like Fluent Bit started out as logs, but does all telemetry types, the heritage of the OTel collector is distributed traces. That is still the most mature signal. Those of you that work with it, I'm sure have experienced that, but it does support now metrics and logs. The OTel collector, speaking of languages, is written in Go, so very familiar language. A lot of people working in Go. The CNCF ecosystem tends to have a lot of support of that. So we've now focused on Ruby, C, and Go in our conversation. OTel does support a lot of plugins, as I kind of foreshadowed there. It's backed by a huge community that is writing plugins for all different kinds of use cases, and we'll come back to that point. It also is backed by a rich collection of components and tooling from vendors and community members. And it really benefits, obviously, from the broader OTel ecosystem and is very strong at supporting all the latest features that come into that, whether it's profiles or other things. OTel Collector is also very good at resource detection, which is something I don't know if we're going to demo that, but I think that's an important point as well. So, challenges. Configuration can be challenging, and I think we talk about that with both of them. The other thing is to that plugin point, contributed integrations really make the OTel collector flexible and able to adapt to a lot of different data sources and use cases, but those aren't always maintained, and sometimes they are too specific. So as an example, let's see, S3 as a plugin works great for one specific path, but it wouldn't necessarily adapt to other use cases. So just keeping that in mind. So it's very rich and very flexible, and that brings both, great benefits and some challenges there. And it's not tested and maintained, et cetera. Version dependency per component is also a challenge. So sometimes the different components and different versions are a little bit clunky together. So something to watch out for. And frankly, it may require some additional planning. So we talked about resources and where Fluent Bit is very good at resource constrained environments. With OTel Collector, there are more resources required. So you just want to think about that as you are moving forward with OTel. So what have I missed on the OTel Collector side?
Yeah, I think one big thing within OTel Collector as well, we talked about how there's many variations or many different plugins. So you'll start to see many distributions. You might see an Amazon distribution, you might see an observability provider distribution. So it can be hard to figure out which of those distributions do I use? Do I build it myself? And which plugins are included in which distributions. There's a contribution distribution, but that's a couple of
Mhm.
gigs. It just adds a little, I shouldn't say complexity, but friction to making the decision of which specific collector to use. And one thing I
Yeah.
always just make folks cautious of is when using OpenTelemetry, you also have to just make sure that your backend supports a lot of the formatting and schema that OpenTelemetry dictates. And one example of this, if we think of the logging schema, which I'll show throughout the demo too, it has a structure of attributes and resources or scope, and it has an array of all of the messages, which makes it great. You could think of a container that says, hey, here's my container ID, here's my container name, and then here are all the messages of that container. Pretty efficient
Hmm.
way to structure that message. But when you send that to an observability provider, you might actually take that resource and scope and duplicate it across every single message, which really just adds more volume
Mhm.
and essentially cost sometimes to these observability providers. So just have to be conscious of it. A little more friction with the distro side piece, but yeah, and then maybe some benefit here as well is the Go ecosystem is so strong. So if there is a library that is interesting to you, whether it's SIMD for some more performance, or even like an AWS SDK for some sort of variation in functionality. It's very easy to import, try something out, prototype with it, add that functionality. So certainly really good benefits there too with that extensibility.
That's a great point. You made me think of something else also, which is with OTel Collector, do beware of vendors who are saying they are using OTel, but they've actually forked it and have created a proprietary version of the OTel Collector. So I have seen this where you assume you're going to be able to use this open standard and move things around, but it's actually locked down. So there's a couple times that I have seen that. So another kind of, I guess, just thing to be aware of as you're looking at who you're working with. All right. I think this is all you, buddy.
Yeah, yeah. So these next two slides were presented by Henrik at one of the observability day here right next to KubeCon. And they were so good. And I was trying to articulate these same points. And I said, let me give Henrik a shout out. So shout out Henrik if you see this. And I'll use these two slides because I think this first one talks about the design patterns. The next one talks a little bit about processing side. But on the design patterns, I think it really illustrates how some of the differences in nuance within the two applications and where you might look at, hey, where could I potentially do something here versus there? And within Fluent Bit, we try to follow a very strict pipeline structure. You have your inputs, you have some processing side pieces of it, and then essentially you send that data out to whatever backend it might go to. Now, within Fluent Bit, we also have this notion of processors, which is meant to be very optimized. So when we think of that resource efficiency, as data comes in, we can add or redact or do some type of changes on top of it, continue down that pipeline, and then as we send that data out, we can also do some sort of modifications. Where this becomes useful is really in that multi-routing aspect. So you can imagine where I'm sending data from one log file to an observability backend and to an archival store. When I send it to the observability backend, as I send it out, I might do a little processing to do a little reduction of that data, a little modification of that data to keep the volume low. And the archival one, keep everything as is, it's a straight copy. So that processing can happen on each and every output as almost like separate streams. So that becomes useful from a processing standpoint. On the OTel collector, right, we actually have more types of components here. So while you have the receiver that can read or write or pull or receive incoming messages and do the processing, you also have the connector and extension type framework. When that becomes super useful when we think of aspects like authentication. And if you look back at the rise of the OpenTelemetry framework, kind of inheriting stuff from open tracing and open census, I'll come back to that, is effectively how do I bring in all of this auth piece like OAuth and having my application speak this. So the connector ecosystem kind of sits on the side of that, and that can be really powerful for all of the data that you want to come in where it needs to have certain auth tokens, it needs to have certain authentication, have certain principles behind it. And it can make it a little harder when you're trying to do multi-routing with a little different data in the put. So right in FluentBit, you have kind of these distinct pipes. In OpenTelemetry Collector, you kind of have this broader pipe, and the modifications can be a little more difficult. Okay, so yeah, talking a little bit about the processing a bit more in depth. Some of the really nice pieces here is how they segment the data, right? And we'll talk about the three major sources: traces, metrics, logs. And then OTel collector traces metric logs and kind of the continuing evolution of that too, like eBPF and stuff that's happening there is always fun to see. In Fluent Bit, they're actually treated as very distinct pipes. So if I take metrics, if I'm scraping metrics from Windows or scraping metrics from the Linux server, I can only send it to specific outputs or destinations that support metrics. I can't just send it to a log destination or anything like that. And same thing with logs and traces. So logs and traces actually have to have very specific inputs and outputs that can read, write, or modify them. In the OTel collector, it's a bit more fluid, so you can have these different signals across all of them. They're still very much in the configuration, and I'll show a little bit of that here too. More designation for the inputs and how they're specifically called in the processor and output side. But you're not necessarily in that straight silo. And that can, I think the trade-off here is if you're very strongly typed and have a very strict, we don't want things to cross, or we want to treat metrics very specifically, FluentBit has that strict guarantee. And OpenTelemetry, again, a bit more fluid, has a little bit more to do with reading and interpreting that configuration.
That's great. I think that's a perfect segue now. So there's a lot of ways they handle the data differently. There's also ways they work together very well. Um, both projects support what I would call open observability, and they've done a lot of work to speak each other's protocols. So Fluent Bit, for its part, has fully conformed to OpenTelemetry specifications and schema. FluentBit offers OTLP endpoints to ingest OTel formatted data from your existing SDKs, libraries, and instrumentation. And for those that are, already invested in the OTel ecosystem, which I know probably a lot of you are, FluentBit has functionality to turn any arbitrary collection into OTel logging schema. And in turn, OTel Collector has a receiver and exporter that enables you to ingest or route telemetry via Fluent's forward protocol. So a lot of goodness there and a lot of collaboration across those communities. So when do they work beautifully together? So there's a few use cases I particularly like. Putting Fluent Bit for collection at the edge in a resource constrained environment, like we talked about, Fluent Bit shines, while the OTel collector can provide centralized aggregation and some advanced processing. So that's one use case that we're seeing. Another great example is Google Cloud's Ops Agent combines the collection of logs, metrics, and traces into a single process, and it uses Fluent Bit for logs and the OTel collector for metrics and traces. I have seen many, many organizations use both as part of their overall observability architecture. And larger organizations, kind of like we just talked about with the Google Cloud, will use Fluent Bit for its sweet spot in logging and OTel for where it's strongest with tracing. So that's kind of just three examples of where we see them operating together at the same time. And there may be other places. Is there anything else you want to talk about before you jump into the demo?
Yeah, I think like as Margaret mentioned, right, the collection side and the processing side become pretty easy ways to say, okay, it can fit over here versus here. I think there are
Mm-hmm.
also complex places too where I might want to do a little bit more log transformation and I might want to do more custom logic. And leveraging something like the Lua filter in FluentBit might be a great way to go achieve that. I might parse a lot of logs so you might have these things stacked together sometimes as well. And sometimes your provider is your observability or cloud provider is going to have something out of the box, and you don't necessarily need to fight too much with that, right? If it's there, these things speak open. The whole point of these frameworks is to be open and have many receivers, many different places that can consume it. So there's no need to fight those things like that. And there are other we were talking very specific about Fluentbit and OTel. There are other agents too. I just would be a little weary of some things like that, where you have these proprietary agents. They might speak some protocols. You just want to be cautious of hey, they might have a different outlook or different view
Right.
of how OpenTelemetry can be formatted. So that would
Exactly.
just be my only consideration in that too. All
All
right.
right, we're going to jump into a demo
Yes.
live. So here we go.
Well, it's fun for live demos. So I'm going to show a terminal here, and folks can see that screen. Perfect. Okay. So what I'm going to show is like, how do these things actually work together? What could it actually look like? And we're going to show four configurations, and I'll share a lab here right afterwards so you can try all of this stuff as well. But if I look at a very basic, let's say Fluent Bit configuration, in fact, let's do a Vim so we get a little color highlighting here. But I'm just going to generate a sample message and I'm going to output it to the terminal. One of the most simple Fluent Bit configurations that exists. And if I go run that configuration, as we would expect, we're going to start to get a message printed every single second, just a dummy message, a test message, if you will. Now that's Fluent Bit and in how it runs normally, but how does it look when we start to add some of the OpenTelemetry side things? And one of the benefits is there's a lot of stuff that folks have built up over the years. How do I do this with Fluent Bit? How do I do this with collection? And that kind of 10-year legacy has given folks, they might have hundreds of Fluent Bit configs. And we wanted to say, how could we bring all of that goodness into an OpenTelemetry schema and format? And so what we did was created this OpenTelemetry envelope. And if I show you the configuration, let's do another Vim, Flimpid OTel. I'll scroll back up. You'll see here, um, go ahead and refresh it. This is the fun of using a web-based terminal. If you accidentally resize it, it gets a little um, gets a little wonky sometimes. But if I look at that configuration, you'll see there's a processor there, and that's called OpenTelemetry envelope. And effectively, we take all of the stuff, the legacy files, mock data, everything that exists, and bring it into an OpenTelemetry format automatically. The schema, resources, you can start adding all of those things and attributes to it. So if we look at what that looks like, scroll down, you'll see there's the group metadata, there's the resource ID, scope ID. And you can customize all those as you need, but at least I'm able to take this raw log that exists and I'm able to bring it into OpenTelemetry. We want to make that very easy. So as you're stepping into the OpenTelemetry world, like how do I make that simple? How do I make that easy? Right? You saw 2, 3 lines of configuration, and you're essentially good to go there. Now, what I want to do is how do these things work together? So we just talked about the schema and the format. How do we do that conversion? Let's actually run an OpenTelemetry collector in another window, and then we're going to send data from Fluent Bit to that OpenTelemetry collector. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen here, or switch my window. I have another OpenTelemetry configuration. So let's go and let's open that up to see what is it going to do on the OpenTelemetry collector side. Here I'm listening to the OpenTelemetry protocol, and I'm doing something super simple. I'm just printing my message out to the console, similar to what I was doing in Fluent Bit, but for only the data that I receive. So I'll go ahead and run that. Tell collector config, tell listen, and now it's listening. It's saying, "Hey, send me any data on port 4317, or if you have HTTP 4318." And I'll print whatever that is to the console. So we'll go back to this one, and we're gonna go ahead and scroll back up. And now I'm gonna run actually, let me first show you the Fluent Bit configuration that is going to send that data to OpenTelemetry. So the same dummy input with the OpenTelemetry envelope, and I'm still printing that data out to the console. And then I'm using the OpenTelemetry output. And you'll notice here on the very bottom, I know it's a little small, so I'll read it out, is one, I have HTTP2 on and gRPC, right? These are essential parts of OTLP if you're sending over HTTP2. You can still do HTTP1 if you need to, but right? We also align with the newer stuff that OpenTelemetry has as well. So let's go ahead and start sending that data. Okay, that same printout that we had before. And now I'm going to switch into the other window here. And yeah, here we go. We're seeing the data coming from Fluent Bit. So that architecture pattern of I have collection at the edge, or I have something maybe more lightweight at the edge. I'm taking that data and I'm sending it to the OpenTelemetry Collector. Now this has been a little boring only because of the mock data. So let's do a bit more intense of a log, right? Something that is I would say a bit more voluminous, if you will. And so this is a log that's just generally there within your system. It's tracking all of the different package updates, everything like that. And so I'm just printing out, this is a fairly long, it's even lagging my terminal as I'm printing out type of log. And there's a couple of properties about this log that I think are important. One, there's no structure. Two, if I'm tailing this log with FluentBit today, how am I going to convert something like this into OpenTelemetry? That becomes a thought of like, how am I going to be able to do it? And how am I able to do that and then send it to maybe an OTel gateway, etc. So we have another configuration here. And this is taking that log I just printed, that var log DNF. I'm just starting from the top of the log, so the same cat type function. And then I'm doing the same OpenTelemetry envelope, and then I'm firing it over that same exact endpoint. So fairly easy, but a bit more fun of a data source versus that mock data. So now we'll go ahead and run that. It's blasting through, it's doing each of the conversions, and it's firing that data over. And now if I switch over here, I'm seeing that whole log file coming in through the OpenTelemetry collector. So what we just did, we took that log file that was coming in raw, one line at a time. We converted it into an OpenTelemetry format, and then we sent it to the OTel collector to receive it. And what I mentioned earlier, why these OTel formats are important and why you want to check like how does the backend receive and understand this data is because if we had taken this and multiplied every line by resource and attributes, it could be fairly voluminous. So here, thankfully, right, this is an OTLP compatible endpoint. It's an OTel collector. So it just looks just like the file I catted before, but now it's coming in from Fluent Bit. And yeah, that's a little bit of the um, demo with Fluent Bit. There's a couple of labs which we'll give a link to here afterwards, so you can try way more scenarios as well. And then even if you're just starting off with the projects, they have some great content around how to get started there. So I'll post that in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I think you're going to walk through kind of a real world use case that you're doing with an organization right now.
Exactly. And this is, I think, the fun part of it is we can talk all of the theoreticals, we can demo everything, but it really, when it comes down to solving a problem, how do we actually go about doing that? And there was a couple of things we mentioned earlier. One is on the collection side, if you're a more resource intensive environment, and the second is if my application already has FluentBit in it, right? If we think of ECS and EKS, these are Amazon services around containerization, they already contain FluentBit by default. Let's leverage that, let's use that. And then from there, we can send it to what's called a FluentBit aggregator. And that acts similar to like an OpenTelemetry gateway. It does the processing, does the redaction, does the removal, sends it to a backend, also sending it to an archival store. And then if we look at something like Lambda, which doesn't really have an out-of-the-box Fluent Bit configuration, has these ways of plugging into like Lambda layers to do the collection of the system. There's a fantastic team at Amazon that's built what's called the OTel Collector Lambda layer. And that's one way to go do that collection and leverage it. And the cool part about that is because these projects work well together, we still need to do redaction and removal and deduplication on all of the system data that's coming in. But we can use OTel to collect it, and we can use the aggregator and the same rule set across all of these different applications. So for this customer, it was great to one, just kind of use what already existed to get some velocity in collecting that data. And then for the new sources like Lambda, hey, there's a great way to just use OTel to plug into that and route it. And the last bit I'll mention there is, right, when we think about the applications that are instrumented, these are your Java, .NET. The OpenTelemetry community has done an amazing job maintaining and building out all of these different libraries. And you should absolutely, if you're looking to do instrumentation in the app itself, use those libraries. That becomes, fantastic to then use as part with an OTel gateway. You can now send traces from there. So really good paradigm and something where, hey, let's combine what works well. Let's just solve the challenges and the problems here.
I love that. So, right before we get to Q&A, how should you be thinking about this for your organization, for your use? And the thing I always start with anyone I'm talking to is, what works for your core competency? Do you already have engineers who have worked on Fluent Bit or OTel? Do you have a lot of developers working in Go? Do you have your C coders? Like what is not going to be such a huge lift for you? If you've already standardized an hotel, then it would make sense to keep in that direction, right? Also, are you partnering with a vendor that can help influence features in the project based on their contribution? Or really partner with them on a project, because it's always nice to have those kind of bigger resources than you may have. What are your data sources and destinations you need to support? That could influence it. We talked about, different use cases, whether it be an edge use case or something else. And finally, what is your overall environment? How important is performance? How important is some of these integrations? What are the data sources you're looking at? And also data volume, what kind of scalability and performance, are you looking at? Is your log data or tracing data or metrics data, really the thing you want to focus on? So some of those questions as you think about how best to adapt to your specific use cases, your specific environment, and your specific talent set. And really, I would even back up more and say the first question I would always ask is, are you working with someone where you're locked into a proprietary, agent or collector and the plugins are kind of out of your control, or are you hoping to leverage an open standard? And I will tell you that with many of our customers, especially when we're migrating them from what a more proprietary technology is, we will move them to an OTel standard, or we will help them use both OTel and Fluent Bit. So obviously we're a little bit biased because we are, open source zealots, but I think that helps them moving forward once you get through that lift. So with that, we do want to mention that every other Friday we have a Fluent Bit office hour where you can ask the maintainers, Anurag, Eduardo, other experts in Fluent Bit, any question you want. So we have a lot of very dynamic conversations going on. And I'll stick that slide on for just a minute while we get to Q&A. And I think we were trying to wrap up around 45 minutes, so I think we have time for a couple questions. I will check chat. Um, we did get some pre-submitted questions, Anurag, and one of them I'll start with, and then I'll look into the chat a bit, is what about other OSS projects that do this like Vector? I think you touched on this, but not Vector specifically, but you did talk about there's other projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with some of these other projects, what I am always cautious of is one, are they part of the CNCF so that they're always going to be remain an Apache 2 project? And I think the other side of it is you can also integrate them as well, right? They have some open protocols and pieces. I generally try to recommend going to something like OpenTelemetry Collector or Fluent Bit, but if you need to just have some quick integration, we can receive data from those type of applications as well.
That's great. You talked a little bit about Fluent D, and someone is asking that their current a Fluent D shop, should they be migrating to Fluent Bit, and is that a big lift?
Yeah, yeah. So there are some differences, as I mentioned, with Fluentd, even in how we manage and handle specific data, right? routing and how do we do buffering are a little different. So there is some time that needs to be invested within Fluent D to Fluent Bit conversions. I actually just recently wrote a migration blog about Fluent D to Fluent Bit.
Hmm.
And I'd also mention, right, besides just the actual action of doing it, when you think of do I want to do things with OpenTelemetry? Do I want to do things with metrics and traces? Really, a lot of the innovation is being put into Fluent Bit. So, what I recommend too for hey, if my logs aren't growing and they're pretty steady pace and it's working in Fluent D, there might not be a heavy
Hmm.
burden or requirement to do that migration. But if things are growing, which most folks are, and if you're doing a lot of metrics and traces, or you want to do some of the open telemetry stuff I showed, FluentBit is really where a lot of that is being driven. And I'd highly recommend doing that conversion.
Yeah, that's a great point. So final question here. This person says, do either or both of these fit into a architecture with a telemetry pipeline? So I think this is very interesting because I feel like in the last 12, 18 months, we've gone from kind of the vernacular as well as the technology of a telemetry pipeline being fairly nascent to being almost mainstream now. So how are you thinking about these technologies when it comes to a telemetry pipeline in the overall architecture?
Yeah. When I think of a telemetry pipeline, I go to a prospect or customer and talk about a telemetry pipeline. We think of like what is all of the data that they are trying to
Mhm.
source and how are they trying to utilize that data, or what is potentially the challenges they're trying to solve with the volume of data, the sensitivity of the data, the teams, and the things that don't have show back, charge back. And what is really crucial in a telemetry pipeline is how do you go collect, how do you route, where do things end up, or what sources can we support? And these projects are fairly fundamental to like an overall telemetry pipeline. We want to make sure that you can do the collection, do it reliably, have buffering, have back pressure support. How do we do storage, and how do we do routing to maybe a highly available telemetry pipeline. So it comes in very frequently. And really, that's where thinking about a telemetry pipeline very holistically is going to pay tons and tons of dividends to an organization because they one have a super open, they're using FluentBit or OpenTelemetry Collector on the edge, so they're not locked in at all. They have a telemetry pipeline in the middle that maybe is scaling up, scaling down, doing cost reduction, and
Mhm.
then routing to multiple places. So, yeah, very
Yeah,
important.
that's great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Anurag. Loved your demo. And there's some resources in the chat with some links if you want to follow up on some of that. Again, join us for Fluent Bit office hours and reach out with questions as you continue to process this. But hope this has been helpful, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.